This is the Dallas Morning News.
Welcome to the second season of Beyond Talking Points, an American Middle podcast. I'm Abby McCloskey. By the time this podcast airs, the Trump administration will have been in place for 100 days. Today, I'm talking about what this administration means for Texas, with the longest-serving governor of our state, the former energy secretary, and my former boss. Thanks for joining us. There's so much to talk about. Let's dive in. I'm here with Governor Perry. Governor, thanks for being with me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to get to be back with you. We had some good, fun, and productive years working together. So it's good to be back in your presence.
Oh, well, that's super kind. I was thinking back on when we met, actually, which I had just moved to Dallas in 2014, and your campaign manager reached out for a job interview. And, normal job interviews happen in an office and there's paperwork. But that day was when Ebola had broken out in Dallas. Do you remember that? And so we met at Presby. Yep. I was honestly kind of terrified of getting it just walking through the door. We had a big at Presby. We went to a fundraiser in the Park Cities. We flew on a plane back to Austin and then back to Dallas that night. This was all in one day. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a whirlwind and so exciting. And
just another average day.
Another day in the governor's life.
In the early 2000 teens. So
right.
Really interesting time as Ebola came in. Brett Joie, who I named to head up that. Of course, Brett went on to be the Assistant Secretary of Health and oversaw the COVID effort early on.
Wow. And I remember when you left the governorship and got to work with you for that next year leading policy on your 2016 presidential campaign, and brought in actually a lot of the people to speak with you who I've been talking to as part of this podcast. And this is crazy. I looked this up. I hadn't even realized it until this. You're the 12th longest serving governor of any state ever in American history. That's crazy. 5,144 days in office.
Yeah, we had a good run. It's one of the unique things about Texas is we don't have term limits. We trust the people to make the decision. I always tell people who stand up and say, "Well, we need term limits. We'll get rid of these people who are in office that we don't agree with or what have you." And it's kind of like, that's being lazy. If you don't like the people that are serving you, you go work to remove them from office. That's how it should work. So, and my point is, if you have somebody that's really good running your company, you have a CEO that's just knocking it out of the park, record, you don't want to force them out after term limits, So term limits is an easy and a lazy thing for the electorate to do. And I'm saying that with great respect of the electorate. But if you don't like the people you got, you go work and get them gone. That's the democratic representative type of government that we have set up. So, don't be lazy, go to work.
Yeah. Well, and, opposite of lazy governor, then you went on to be the Secretary of Energy. So you kind of even trumped your own political ambition. And I am still, I've known you for a long time. Do I call you secretary or governor or what?
Governor's a lot better. Governor's a lot better title. Trust me. And Abby, I'll share with you and your listeners, the best job I ever had in the world was being the governor of Texas. Mm-hmm. And even George Bush, after he had been president for 6 months, made that same statement to me in a private conversation, and that he would not mind me making public. He said, "Perry, being the governor of Texas is the greatest job in the world." And I said, "You're right, Mr. President, it is." Did
you just wake up and decide to be governor one day, or how does that even happen? How does that even work?
God's got a plan, and trust in Him, and He'll take care of you. It may not be what you think. There was a time when I thought I wanted to be president of the United States, and
I remember I was there.
You were there. You went along for the ride, but that wasn't God's plan. And I never planned to be governor of the state of Texas. When I got out of the Air Force in 1977. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a bit lost, both in every way that you can be lost.
Yeah.
And God kind of dealt with me and got me to understand, number one, to listen to Him and to be faithful. And when I did that, then he'd put up a hurdle over here, or he'd remove a hurdle over here. And I truly believe he had, his hand on me as I went through. And in '83, I made the decision to run for state representative. And that kind of started me on a gradual learning process of how government works in the state of Texas in particular. And 6 years as a state rep, 3 terms, 2-year terms. And then I switched parties. Most people don't realize I started my political career as a Democrat. Ronald Reagan made it okay for people like me, conservative Democrats, to become a Republican. My dad saw him, and my dad was elected 7 times county commissioner out here where we live as a Democrat. But he was a substantial fan of Ronald Reagan. And anyway, the long story short, I changed parties in '89, I believe. And then I ran for agriculture commissioner in 1990 and was fortunate to be elected to that post, a statewide office in Texas, and 2 terms there. And then in '98, I ran for lieutenant governor in a very hard fought, close competition between my classmate and my friend, John Sharp, who was the comptroller then. And we won by a percentage or 2, and I became the lieutenant governor. And then, of course, when George W. was elevated to the presidency in 2000, I was sworn in as the, I think, 47th governor, 47th governor of Texas on the 21st of December of 2000. And then,
and the rest is history.
Yeah, served until January of 2015. So 14 plus years.
I really admire that you had a slow build and a long tenure in Texas politics, which I think is just a way to accumulate wisdom and expertise along the way. But something I've also admired about you is how you've used your platform to help vulnerable people in our state and country, and specifically veterans with PTSD. And I'm wondering if you can just chat with me a bit about your work there, and then we'll move into some more policy-oriented conversations.
Well, and before I do that, let me share with you. Somebody asked me the other day, what was the most influential thing you did while you were governor? And I told him, I said, my instinct on this, there are 2 things. I appointed a substantial number of people to the courts, to district courts, but to the Supreme Court, to the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the Supreme Court for civil matters. And I mean, at one point in time, I had appointed over half of the Supreme Court justices. Of course, our justices all run for office, but we had just interesting people had left the Supreme Court, like Judge Phillips left, and I got to replace him.
Yeah.
But at one time, there were 5 of the 9 that I had appointed. So the long-term impact on people by that judicial philosophy that's been instilled there is going to make a continuing long-term effect on the state of Texas. But the place that I will suggest that we, and this wasn't me by myself, obviously, it was me working with the legislature, is on education. And I'll try to be very brief with this, but in 2000, Texas was 27th in the nation in high school graduation rates, and middle of the pack, which with as much population as we have, we're about 20 million people in 2000. We're very diverse geographically. We're diverse ethnically. We're diverse in a lot of different ways. When you look from Houston to El Paso to Amarillo to
it's different than Massachusetts.
And so being in the middle of the pack, a lot of people go, well, that's about what we expected, but we knew we could do better. Long story short, in 2003, when Texas became a Republican state, we had a Republican speaker, lieutenant governor, House, and the Senate. And we decided we were going to make some changes in our education program to make it more competitive, to challenge our students and our teachers and administrators. And what we did is we created, we started testing children in the 4th and 8th grade. And there were some people that pushed back, oh, our children don't, my daughter doesn't test well. And I was kind of like, well, I understand that, but the world's going to test them and we need to prepare them for that. So we started testing for math and reading in the 4th and 8th grades. And what we did is that when we analyzed a young person was having some problem, we gave them the help that they needed to get them back on track so that they could read and do math at grade level. And then we had the most extensive teacher incentive pay program in the nation. I believe I'm correct in that at that particular point in time. Basically, if your children did better on the test, you got more money. It's funny how that works. You get more of what you incentivize. So if, we're giving these teachers incentive pay for their students to do better. And the third thing we did is we expanded charter schools. Those three things that we did, testing, incentive pay for teachers, and charter schools. And we every session of the legislature did some tweaking on those. But by 2011, Texas was number 2 in the nation in high school graduation rates. The only state that had a higher percentage of kids that were going or getting their high school diplomas was Connecticut. Wow. And they all looked like me, except they were rich. and so, I mean, my hat is so off to the public school teachers, for the administrators, and certainly to the legislators that had the courage to do these things. But, all the naysayers, it's not going to work and what have you. Well, we went from 27th, middle of the pack, to second highest graduation rates in America. Here's my point. There are young people who stayed in high school, and Texas was having a burgeoning Hispanic population at that point in time, and a young Hispanic fella who got to be 14 and wasn't prepared to go do algebra in high school. He dropped out, bought a pickup truck, and went to work. That was kind of the history. That changed during the 2000s, where those kids stayed in school. Their lives were inextricably changed. Literally hundreds of thousands of young people that went to school in Texas from 2003 until still were recipients of this opportunity to perform at a higher level from a school wise. And the clear evidence that when you graduate from high school, your economic ability is substantially increased. And a lot of those kids went on to community college or four-year institutions and became, the professionals and the leaders. The next governor of Texas is most likely going to be in that, or certainly the next leaders of Texas are going to be in that batch of kids who were graduating during that period of time. But my point, Abby, is that is what we really did in Texas during that period of time. Yeah, we had great economic development. People moved to this state. We didn't overtax, overregulate, overlitigate, and we had a skilled workforce. So that, though, has been one of the things, if not the thing, that I'm most proud of that I did while I was governor.
Yeah. So, and you did so much as governor with our state, getting companies to locate here, with the judicial system, with the education system. On this podcast, we're talking a lot about national policy, and I want to talk with you about, well, federalism's like, the fancy word for it, but the intersection between what happens at the national stage and what happens in Texas, because, as you mentioned, we're still for sure in the Texas miracle, and our economy dominates that of any other state. People are moving here, but we also have a ton of immigrants, legal and unauthorized. We are the biggest exporter and importing state in the nation. And these things are impacted not necessarily only by state policy, but by national policy. And so, when you were governor, how did you think about that? Like both advocating on behalf of our state, but then also what was happening at the national level?
And as you'll recall, I wrote a book in 2010 called Fed Up that was basically a defense of the 10th Amendment and taking on the federal government overstepping their bounds. Um, and that's always going to be a tension between the states and the federal government. And a great example of it you know, I didn't like the states coming in and telling us how to run our business, particularly with things that were not either statutorily or, frankly, constitutionally approved. They just come in and said, okay, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And it's kind of like, that's really not your role. Leave that to the states to decide how best to do that. And then, I'll be a little bit political here. 4 years ago, when the Biden administration came in, and we started seeing all of this illegal immigration, people coming into this country completely and totally illegally. We don't know who they were. We don't know anything about them. Now, in hindsight, we know more about them than we did then. And it's
we talked about that on one of our podcasts, especially after COVID, when the world was locked down and the U.S. roared back to life.
Yeah.
That there was just this huge surge.
And so it's a two-edged sword. It's a balancing act. There should be some agreement between the federal governments and the states of, here's our responsibility and here's yours.
Well, I'd be remiss. I know we've talked a while. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about just energy. Just from your standpoint, how do we think about our energy resources right now in 2025? Are things plentiful? Are things scarce? Just kind of what's your landscape view of it?
We're blessed in this country to have this extraordinary resource of natural gas, petroleum products, coal. There are two ways that you can get baseload energy, and baseload energy is what you have to have, in my opinion, so that you have the electrical power to be able to participate in the global economy, and particularly with AI-driven data centers that are coming.
Which is
AI,
gobbling up a lot of energy.
Huge amounts of it. Just huge amounts of it. I was in Memphis, Tennessee, looking at a project that XAI is working on over there yesterday. And it's stunning how many gigawatts of power that we're going to need just to keep our head above water, so to speak.
And do we have it?
We don't.
Or is this? Yeah.
And we don't. And that's the challenge. And those forms of energy are obviously fossil fuels, our petroleum products and our coal, and nuclear. Those are the two base loads. Wind and solar have their place. Don't get me wrong. I was a big advocate for wind back in the early 2000s. I think they let the subsidization of those two get out of hand. And in my opinion, they need to be more market oriented. And the real challenge for them is they're not available 24/7. They are intermittent. Is the proper word. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't always shine.
AI data center going on and off. Yeah.
No, and so and we don't have the batteries yet. Now, if you recall, 20 years ago there was a pretty good book written and a guy that gave a speech called Peak Oil. We'd found all the oil there was. It was going to be a declining curve, and that was just. That was it. George Mitchell made that guy wrong. George Mitchell being the great petroleum engineer from Texas A&M who discovered hydraulic fracturing, and then along with hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling, and we have access to an extraordinary amount of natural gas, which is a clean burning fuel. And so that's, we have the resources. And there will be more George Mitchells in the world going forward. It may be on the battery side. It may be, something that we haven't dreamed up. It may be on the small modular reactor side, which those are approaching, if they're not already. They're obviously walk-away safe already, but they're economically feasible. The challenge for nuclear is the regulatory side of it. We have a antiquated regulatory system in place that is too slow, too cumbersome.
Is it because people are scared of them blowing up, basically? Like,
I think
Chernobyl?
That's part of it. Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl.
I mean, scary stuff.
All of those, scare people, but it goes all the way back to the 60s before you were born. And
that's true.
Well, by a bunch. and the mushroom cloud from Russia and the nuclear holocaust, Hiroshima and Nagasaki from World War II. And that mentality has stayed around. And I think we have a president today who totally gets it about small modular reactors. And I think you're going to be seeing executive orders. You're certainly going to see directives, both from Congress and from Secretaries Wright and Burgum, to move these SMRs forward, expediting their permitting and their siting, et cetera, to address the AI needs or data center that these AI technologies are going to go forward. And we will win this race. I am confident we will win the race to get us to be the leaders in AI going forward. And it will be because American energy, all of the above, it'll take all of it. But I think America's all of the above energy strategy and policy is why we will win the global AI war.
And Governor, I want to close with this. At this stage in your life and professional career, looking out at our country, which is, as it always has been, rapidly changing in ways that are good and ways that are maybe less than good. We're super polarized right now politically. Just as you think out, like, what is your biggest political hope for us as a nation?
Well, I don't think I'm Pollyanna. We worked pretty well together here in Texas. And we're, as we said earlier in this podcast, we had a very diverse population. But one of the people I worked really close with, now she and I we weren't on the same wavelength. I mean, she was a African-American female lawyer from inner city Houston. She's about as different as you can get from me being a white boy from rural Paint Creek, Texas, and a conservative. And she was a true blue Odie liberal. But we found things to work together on. I think we can get back to that. We just need to realize that this isn't a zero-sum game. We're all in this together. Let's find the things we can work on together. And there's more of that out there than we realize. I think the media likes to always draw these black and white lines between us. And we need to make the effort, though, to show those who say, oh, we can't get along, it's the worst it's ever been in America, that they're wrong. And yeah, we can. And this doesn't have to be the worst times. It can be some of the best times. And in some of the best times, it can be things like working together to win the AI race, working together to find ways to address the mental health crisis that we have in this country, particularly our veterans who have been at war for 20 years. And I want to come back, Abby, and do an entire podcast with you on my passion, what I'm going to do the rest of my life, and that is work on this veterans mental health issue, which will grow into a bigger population, into our general population with the mental health challenges, the addiction challenges that we have. And if we can do that for mankind, then there's a special place in heaven for us.
Well, Governor, I do hope to have you back, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's good to talk with you again.
God bless you. Take care of yourself.
I'm Abby McCloskey. That's a wrap on the second season of Beyond Talking Points, where we talk about what America was promised and what we're getting in Trump's first 100 days. We covered a lot of ground this season, from tariffs to mass deportations to food dyes for kids to DOJ to Christian nationalism. And my takeaway from this season is that Trump was serious about his campaign promises. He's acted on many of them, and it's been extremely chaotic as a result. There's this lure that the first 100 days of a presidency sets a tone for the whole term, and I personally hope it's not what we see for the next 1,000 days. But come what may, my deepest hope is that we can continue to have these conversations across party lines and different beliefs, and as a nation, that we remember an informed electorate is the base of the whole thing. We must maintain the ability to sift, sort, and critically think issue by issue across party lines and hold on to the norms and truths that have gotten us this far. This podcast is one small deposit into that big mission. Thank you, as always, for joining us.